At that moment, the two observers realized that the protagonist had been wearing a weighted vest all along. Based on his visible struggle, one of them estimated the weight to be around 500 kilograms. Even so, they noted that his strength was quite impressive, considering he had managed to stay in the gravity room for over 2 hours. As the protagonist carefully placed his weighted vest on the floor, another voice chimed in, stating that despite his ability, he still couldn't be compared to Wang Tiantuo. This prompted a skeptical response from another onlooker, who asked if that was a joke, questioning who could possibly match a monster like Wang Tiantuo. Before the conversation could end, someone suddenly shouted that Wang Tiantuo was coming out. It was mentioned that he had endured 6 tons of pressure for more than 2 hours. Wang Tiantuo emerged drenched in sweat and clearly exhausted. The crowd was in awe, declaring him the undisputed leader of the training camp in terms of physical power. Some admitted that if they were in his shoes, they would have collapsed after only 30 minutes under a mere 500 kilograms. When Wang Tiantuo removed his weighted vest, it hit the floor with a heavy thud, startling those nearby. He exhaled in relief, though internally, he cursed at just how incredibly heavy the vest had been. Lin Xing suddenly approached and bluntly admitted that he could not compete with Wang Tiantuo in terms of raw strength. He then challenged him to a competition in the movement technique training room instead. Wang Tiantuo declined, noting that Lin Xing practiced an A-rank movement technique with a wind attribute. To him, competing in that specific field was simply unreasonable. The protagonist took note of the mention of an A-rank movement technique. A faint smile appeared on his face as he realized that while his overlord body was powerful, he still lacked a high-level movement technique of his own. The scene soon shifted to the movement technique training room. Everyone watched in amazement as the A-rank technique, Flying Swan Startling Cloud Step, was put on display, a move that was clearly formidable. The training room was filled with a continuous barrage of arrows. Spectators commented that even at difficulty level 3, the projectiles were nearly impossible to dodge. However, Lin Xing set the difficulty to the maximum, level 10. All eyes were glued to the large screen as they tracked his movements. He moved with incredible speed, successfully evading the arrows raining down on him in rapid succession. Some shouted in disbelief at his velocity. To them, his movements were almost too fast for the naked eye to follow, and they were certain they wouldn't last even a second in that environment. Others, however, felt he was merely showing off. They also noticed what appeared to be petals swirling around Lin Xing as he moved. One observer clarified that it wasn't just for show, the technique itself was truly magnificent. The protagonist watched silently with a smile. To him, the beauty and efficiency of the movement technique were undeniable. He then activated his system and began copying the Flying Swan Startling Cloud Step, starting from 1%. With full focus, he mirrored every movement Lin Xing made, his own body beginning to shift slowly in sync. The other students quickly took notice. Some laughed, wondering if he actually believed he could learn an A-rank movement technique simply by watching. Another student remarked that he could hardly contain his laughter, finding the idea of mastering such a high-level technique in that manner to be utterly impossible. But the protagonist remained in his own world, thinking of nothing but Lin Xinghei's movements. He continued to mimic the actions, and as he did, the copying percentage steadily began to rise. The system notification finally chimed with a congratulatory message. The Flying Swan Startling Cloud Step had reached the basic level. The protagonist let out a breath, instinctively touching his head. He had finally mastered his first A-rank movement technique. However, he couldn't help but notice that Lin Xinghei's style was excessively flashy. In his mind, he found it difficult to adapt such a flamboyant flair to his own combat style, but since he had no other version to reference, he was forced to follow it for the time being. A moment later, another notification appeared, pulling him back to reality. As the specialized mental space faded away, he felt a surge of excitement. Now that he had acquired the movement technique, he felt there was no longer a need to linger in the movement technique training room. Instead, he decided it would be more productive to head to the ferocious beast room to hunt monsters and rack up martial value. But as he prepared to leave, he froze upon hearing whispers from behind him. Turning around, he was shocked to find that nearly everyone was staring at him. One student remarked that his footwork looked exactly like Lin Xinghei's. Another chimed in, admitting that even he couldn't pull off such flashy movements and expressed genuine admiration. A wave of embarrassment washed over the protagonist. He suddenly realized that the movements he was practicing within his mind had actually translated into physical actions in the real world. He cursed silently, vowing never to practice like that in front of others again. He immediately bolted from the room. As he hurried away, he could still hear students shouting behind him, begging him to repeat the performance because they thought it looked incredibly cool. While running, he sensed he was being followed. Glancing back, he spotted the 2 men he had clashed with previously. He overheard one of them saying they had finally tracked him down and that he seemed to be heading toward the ferocious beast room. They planned to wait and ambush him at the exit once he was finished inside. Upon arriving at the ferocious beast room, he found a large crowd of students gathered to watch the trials. Standing near the entrance were Wang Tiantuo and Xiao Yan. Wang Tiantuo was laughing as he spoke to Xiao Yan, noting that the latter wanted to compete in a monster hunting match. Xiao Yan confirmed this, explaining that he simply wanted to settle who the true number one in the training camp was. With a boastful air, Wang Tiantuo asked if Xiao Yan really thought he could win, pointing out that his own physique was the barbarian god body, while Xiao Yan relied solely on spiritual telekinesis. To Wang, it felt like he was being underestimated. Xiao Yan remained calm, suggesting that perhaps it was Wang Tiantuo who was underestimating the true power of a spirit master. The protagonist's interest was piqued. He had never actually seen a spirit master in combat before, so he decided to observe their match first before starting his own hunt for martial value. As Xiao Yan entered the arena, the internal scene flashed onto the large monitors. The protagonist noticed that Xiao Yan appeared to be hovering in the air. This puzzled him, as he knew the ability to fly was typically reserved for grandmasters. He wondered if Xiao Yan had already reached that level of mastery as a spirit master. Before he could process the thought, Xiao Yan conjured a spirit ball in his hand. From this orb, sharp bursts of energy shot out in rapid succession, striking the monsters directly in the head. In an instant, 3 Tier 1 high-stage black tigers were slain by the flashing energy. The protagonist watched, deeply impressed by the display. However, while Xiao Yan was occupied with the fight, a massive black tiger radiating a terrifying aura suddenly lunged from behind him. But before the beast could land a strike, it froze midair, as if held in place by an invisible force. The protagonist finally understood that Xiao Yan's strategy wasn't limited to long-range strikes, he could effectively paralyze his opponents using spiritual telekinesis. With a simple wave of his hand, Xiao Yan finished the monster using a glowing dagger. It was only in that split second that the protagonist realized Xiao Yan had been wielding a hidden blade the entire time. A chill ran through his body as he watched. He couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease considering the array of abilities he had just witnessed, treading on air, manipulating objects from a distance, and freezing enemies in their tracks. He now fully grasped why spirit masters were so feared. With such powers, they could eliminate an ordinary martial artist without ever closing the distance. The roar of the crowd drew his attention back to the large screen. People were shouting in confusion, wondering where a massive weapon had suddenly come from, as Xiao Yan's hands had appeared empty moments before. Looking closer, the protagonist saw Xiao Yan manifesting a gargantuan sword shimmering with golden light. With a single, fluid motion, he violently cleaved the massive beast in front of him in two. The protagonist stood frozen. He was certain Xiao Yan hadn't been carrying a weapon earlier, and judging by its size, that sword likely weighed several tons. At that moment, Lin Xing spoke up, explaining that they were witnessing an A-rank martial skill exclusive to spirit masters. As the protagonist glanced back, the other students remained in a state of collective awe. Someone remarked that it was yet another A-rank skill on display. This prompted other student to ask Lin Xing why it seemed like everyone in this place possessed A-rank abilities. He followed up by asking if Wang Tiantuo had a similar skill. Lin Xing confirmed that he did. Wang Tiantuo also possessed an A-rank martial skill, and it was a purely offensive type. Several students cursed under their breath, while others wondered aloud if these people were even human or actually monsters in disguise. To the protagonist, it was becoming clear that this training camp was a breeding ground for elites with A-rank skills. This realization only reinforced his belief that he had made the right decision by coming here. Another cheer erupted when the crowd saw Wang Tiantuo obliterate a Tier 1 high-stage monster with a single punch. When onlookers asked what kind of martial skill that was, someone replied that it wasn't a skill at all, it was pure, raw strength. The protagonist turned away, thinking to himself that Wang Tiantuo seemingly had no intention of relying on techniques. Ultimately, he decided he would analyze those two more closely another time. Checking his status, a new goal crystallized in his mind: he wanted to become a spirit master. However, his spirit stat sat at only 26.5. According to the system, he needed to surpass 100 to fully awaken as a spirit master. This meant he was short by 73.5 points, which translated to 735 martial value points. The path forward was clear: he needed to kill more monsters to accumulate the necessary points. Shortly after, he entered the ferocious beast room, unaware that the two men who held a grudge against him were still tailing him. As the duo scanned the area, they noticed everyone was preoccupied with watching the duel between Wang Tiantuo and Xiao Yan. No one was paying them the slightest bit of attention, an opportunity they refused to waste. They planned to slip into the room, corner him, and deliver a brutal beating. However, As they approached, one of them suddenly froze and let out a sharp cry. His companion immediately hushed him, telling him to keep quiet, but the man just pointed a trembling finger at the screen. They fell silent for a moment. Then, both men gasped in unison at the scene unfolding on the monitor. The protagonist had challenged over 10 monsters at once, and every single one of them was Tier 1 high stage. They asked one another if he had completely lost his mind. Inside the ferocious beast room, the protagonist stood tall, surrounded by massive monsters and ready for whatever was coming next. Terrified by what was appearing on the monitor, one of the two men asked if they should call an instructor to save the protagonist. In his mind, if they didn't act, the boy was certain to die. However, his companion immediately stopped him, saying it was already pointless. In just a few seconds, the beasts would surely tear him apart. At that moment, they also realized they were powerless to intervene, especially since they weren't strong enough to handle such a situation themselves. Meanwhile, the protagonist stood before the monsters with a calm and total confidence. Without a hint of hesitation, he challenged them. This caused the ferocious beasts to roar in unison as they immediately lunged toward him. He swiftly evaded the first to attack. While keeping in constant motion, he unleashed a series of strikes using energy vibrating from his fingertips. Before long, he gathered an even stronger force in one hand and punched the monsters one by one with glowing energy, knocking them down before the others could even retaliate. The onlookers in front of the screen were stunned once again. One of them couldn't believe it and asked if he was dreaming. Was it actually possible for a Tier 1 initial stage martial artist to do that? Even a middle stage martial artist surrounded by over 10 high stage ferocious beasts would surely be doomed. As they watched the protagonist move, one of them noticed that his movement technique seemed familiar. His companion was shocked when he pointed out that it looked just like Lin Xinghei's flying swan startling cloud step. The other man immediately disagreed, claiming that was impossible. He was just a student from a top high school, so how could he have learned such a high-level movement technique? They wondered if he might be from a powerful family. Another person mentioned that maybe he had just seen Lin Xinghan and copied the movements. Still, to them, that was unbelievable. An A-rank movement technique isn't something you learn simply by watching. This left them questioning exactly how strong the protagonist really was. In the middle of their discussion, one suggested they just forget about their revenge. He believed that even if they teamed up, they still couldn't defeat him. But one of them, trembling while gripping his wooden club tightly, strongly refused. Whether the boy was the son of a powerful family or a monster-tier genius, he couldn't let go of the anger he felt. His companion stopped him again and pointed at the screen. He told him that before he went looking for trouble, he should take a good look at what was happening. When he looked, he nearly dropped the club he was holding. The two of them stood there in a daze. In just a few minutes, the protagonist had killed 11 high-stage ferocious beasts. He sat atop a pile of carcasses. From over a dozen monsters, he had earned a total of 81 martial value points, an average of 7 points each. Right then, he realized that as he grew stronger, it was becoming increasingly difficult to earn martial value. While resting, he suddenly turned his head after hearing a noise from the distance. Gradually, even more ferocious beasts were emerging from different directions. Facing the growing number of enemies, he decided to stop resting. He moved instantly to meet the monsters. He took them down one by one with a barrage of attacks, and after a few moves, he landed heavily on the ground, once again facing a new wave of ferocious beasts approaching him. The protagonist noticed that the monsters suddenly hesitated, as if they felt a deep sense of fear toward him. He wasted no more time, moving instantly, his eyes burning with determination. It was as if he were speaking to them, making it clear they should just hand over their martial value. Without a second thought, he hunted them down and killed them one by one. Outside, the two men remained frozen as they watched the bloody scene on the monitor. Finally, one asked when they would carry out their revenge. But after everything they had witnessed, the man decided to forget the plan and forgive the protagonist. Consumed by fear, his companion quickly agreed, suggesting they leave before they got themselves into serious trouble. As they walked through the crowd of students busy watching the trials, everyone continued to admire the strength of the top participants. In Wang Tiantuo's fight, people were amazed to see him kill 9 Tier 1 high-stage ferocious beasts in under 10 minutes. Meanwhile, Xiaoyan barely moved, yet still managed to take down 8 high-stage ferocious beasts. As the two men were leaving, a student noticed them and asked why they were already back. Hadn't they said they were going to get revenge? He followed up by asking if they had defeated that boy yet. The two were forced to force a smile and say yes, laughing loudly to cover up the truth. But behind their smiles, their expressions turned cold. They couldn't help but remember what they saw. If they had made just one wrong move, they might be lying there right now, lifeless, like trash thrown away. Right then, they fully understood how brutal this training camp was. It wasn't just difficult, it was full of monsters capable of killing at any moment. While they were still lost in thought, their attention shifted when someone shouted that Wang Tiantuo and Xiao Yan had finally come out. They immediately became the center of the conversation. Some said the two had killed so many ferocious beasts even while wearing weighted vests, so they must be incredibly exhausted. Others asked how many contribution points they had earned. Wang Tiantuo answered directly that he got 280 points, while Xiao Yan had 270. Upon hearing that, the crowd was filled with shock. To them, that number was massive. They knew a Tier 1 high-stage ferocious beast was worth only 5 points, meaning the two had killed roughly 50 to 60 monsters each. Checking their wristbands, Wang Tiantuo added that his weight vest settled for an extra 100 contribution points. Xiao Yan sighed, saying he only got 50 from his. Around them, the disappointment of the other students was obvious. Most of them only had about 20 points. One student complained that even though he lifted a ton, he only got 30 points, while another nearly cried admitting he only earned 10. In the middle of the discussion, Lin Xing approached and calmly asked who won their ferocious beast hunt. Without hesitation, Xiao Yan pointed to Wang Tiantuo as the winner. This caused the students to whisper again. They thought that if Wang Tiantuo and Xiao Yan had such high scores, Lin Xing's must be even higher. To everyone there, it seemed like there was no room left for anyone else except to fight for fourth place. But in the back, the two men who previously held a grudge against the protagonist smiled slightly. In low voices, they called the others ignorant. To them, there was a far more terrifying monster inside the training camp, a being that surpassed those three. An hour later, inside the ferocious beast room, the protagonist could be seen sitting atop a pile of monster carcasses. He could barely stand from sheer exhaustion, and his body was drenched in sweat. After over an hour of continuous combat, even with his overlord body, he felt the heavy toll of the fatigue. However, he still hadn't reached his target of 735 martial value points. Currently, his contribution points sat at only 700. While resting, he thought about what would be best to trade for at the martial arts pavilion. Checking his wristband, he saw that he had recorded over 400 ferocious beast kills, and from his weight vest, he had earned more than 300 contribution points. Afterward, the scene shifted to the martial arts pavilion. The protagonist stood before a receptionist and quietly leafed through the equipment catalog. He studied the prices one by one, ranging from various pills to A-rank martial arts. It didn't take long for him to realize that A-rank martial arts were incredibly expensive, costing at least 2,000 points. On the other hand, the pills were more affordable, especially the spirit-gathering pills. As he thought for a long time, the receptionist noticed him and asked if he had made a decision. In the woman's mind, the young man looked like a mere Tier 1 initial stage student who likely couldn't afford anything. The protagonist immediately asked if spirit-gathering pills were used to increase spiritual power. The receptionist nodded and explained that they were most effective during the first use, and the higher the grade, the greater the effect. While scanning the list, he noticed the highest available was Tier 4, priced at 500 contribution points. Without hesitation, he said he would take one Tier 4 spirit-gathering pill. The receptionist was shocked and quickly clarified that it cost 500 points, not 50. But the protagonist calmly confirmed that was indeed his choice. He even showed her his wristband, displaying his 700 contribution points. Because of this, the receptionist couldn't hide her surprise. Her attitude changed instantly, and she hurried to get a box containing the spirit-gathering pill to hand it to him. The protagonist thanked her, but before leaving, he also asked if they had thunder and fire attribute alloy spears. The receptionist energetically replied that they did, and it cost 200 points. After the transaction, the protagonist thanked her again and left. That night, upon returning, he quietly examined his acquisitions, the C-rank dual thunder and fire attribute spear called the Thunder Fire Spear. Looking at his status panel, he noticed that his vitality and guidance techniques had become even more effective. He also gained 490 martial value points. In just a single day, his progress was greater than what he usually achieved in an entire week. Holding the spirit-gathering pill, he calculated his current spiritual power, which was at 26.5. Even with the additional 490 martial value points, he was still short by 25.5 to reach 100. He stared silently at the pill, hoping it would be enough to fill the gap. If he succeeded, he would finally become a full-fledged spirit master. Without a second thought, he swallowed the spirit-gathering pill and waited quietly for its effects to take hold.
The chapter ends here. Watch out for our upcoming uploads. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you'll always be updated on our future videos.